need to be alone. Because in order for you to get where God wants you to be at, you need to go through the sanctification process. And during that process, you need to cut off all the distractions and just focus on God. And you don't even necessarily need to distance yourself forever. There's a season where you need to be alone, just you and God. Because when it's just you and God, there's no more distractions. There's no more people pulling you away from Christ. Now God can reveal the plans that he has for you without you being distracted. Now you can hear his voice more because you cut off all the other noises that are in your mind. And you see, that's what a lot of leaders did in the Bible. You see, Jesus went out to the wilderness to get tempted. He was alone. You see, Paul went to the desert. You see, Moses went to the mountain to go consecrate with God. They did all of this for a season so they could get closer to God in that time period. And when they get out of that time period of being alone, that's when they're the strongest spiritually. That's when you can lead the people away from their sin instead of falling into the sin. Instead of conforming to this world, now you can bring the people from the world into the light. So that's why I say that you need to be alone, but it doesn't have to be permanent. It can be for a season, just so you can get right with God. And it actually says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17 through 18. It says, separate yourself and touch no unclean things, and then he will welcome you as a son or daughter. Because when you separate yourself from the world, now you're not a part of the world. Now you're a part of God. And when you separate yourself from the crowd, then you're going to end up leading the crowd towards Christ. That's where Christ wants you to be. He wants you to lead the people into the light. And the only way you can bring people out of the darkness is if you're in the light. And I remember when I first came to Christ, God was calling me to be alone and separate myself from the people I was hanging around. It was just a deep conviction, and there was nothing going wrong in my life. It was just a conviction just to be alone just for a season. And I'm gonna keep it real. I was like, God, I don't want to do it right now. They my homies. I wanted to enjoy the rest of my summer because I was so young and I just wanted to enjoy it. And although I didn't do it right away, I still ended up doing it. That is when I had my first encounter with God. And that is when I stopped going back to that bondage that I was in. And that's when I started gaining more wisdom and knowledge and clarity on what my future would be looking like. And most of all, that is when I was the most close to God. That is when I felt his presence the most, when I wasn't around the crowd. And the only thing that I was focusing on was God. And if you're wondering what I did in that time of being separated, that is the time where I was going outside and praying and just being out in nature and just talking to God. That is the time where I was in my car when it was sweating hot. It was summer heat. And I was just putting on worship music, feeling his presence. That is when I was waking up, reading my word, going outside, reading the word, in my car, just reading the word. And at that time, I was not talking to anyone. Friends that I was hanging around with, I kind of distanced myself. Even though I loved them, I had to distance myself. And during that time period of me basically just cutting everybody off, God opened so much doors to me. And that's when God started to use me more and more and more. And this was even before I started social media. I say that because if you don't be alone, if you don't separate yourself from the crowd, it's going to be hard to feel the presence of God. It's going to be hard to hear God's voice. It's going to be hard to be spiritually ready for the things that God wants to use you for. Because like the word says, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against the spirits that are coming against us. And so when you go and separate yourself, that is when you are getting spiritually ready. That's when you are training in the spirit, because physical training is good, but training for the spirit is even better. I'm telling you, you need to separate yourself. You need to be alone and just go through a season of just getting closer to God. You need to go through a season of just seeking the kingdom, because once you start to seek the kingdom and all its righteousness, everything else should be added on to you. And just know during that season, you might get tempted, because when Jesus went out to the wilderness to be alone, he got tempted. But use those temptations as a test of your faith so you can grow. And when you start to do that, and when you do all of those things, that's when God will really start to use you and doors will start to open in your life. So go on an isolation period. Go on a time where you're just spending and basking in the presence of God, and watch. Your whole life will start to change. So y'all stay blessed.